Okay, we're about to begin. Good evening. This meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission of October 2nd, 2024 will come to order. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, please, Lori.
Chairman Richardson.
Here.
Vice Chairman Aton. Secretary Grant.
Here.
Member Childs.
Here.
Member Garrard.
Here.
Member Faison.
Present.
Member Moscoso. Here. Alternate Member Findler. Alternate Member Rogers. School Board Member McLaughlin.
We do have a quorum, and we don't normally have a moment of silence, but I'd suggest we take a moment of silence and remember the devastation of our state, the west coast of Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, especially North Carolina. And it done true devastation. It destroyed my cousin's house in Bradenton, and we used to have a cabin in the mountains of North Carolina, and I don't know if it still exists or not. And I've seen some of the videos that I imagine all of y'all had, that people have had no drinking water or anything for 5 days. So let's take a moment of silence in respect for them. Okay. There is no approval of minutes of September 18th. They have been a copy of the minutes distributed to you, and they are in the packet. Any additions or deletions from the minutes? Anyone care to make a motion? Mr. Faison.
I move that we approve the minutes of September 28th, 2024 as written.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Member Moscoso. Any discussion? All agreed, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The minutes are approved. Next item is the Titusville plain language that I brought up, and I would suggest we have that last, come after item 10D. There may be some discussion. Does everyone agree? Do we have to vote on it?
As long as you get consensus, that's fine.
Yeah, consent. Okay, next item is item 10A, rezoning number 3-2024. Eddie?
Before you begin that, Mr. Chairman, there is a petitions and requests in the agenda that starts.
Oh, yes. It's changed.
To just remind the members of the audience, the petitions and request is a section of the agenda that is for non-agenda items only.
Okay, is there anyone that wants to speak under citizens, public present, and press? Anyone to speak? Okay, now we'll go to item 10A. Eddie?
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, Commissioners. Item 10A begins on page 20 of 87 of tonight's packet. The Titusville Resort and Destination Master Plan was approved in October 2021 by Ordinance 29-2021, and a site plan was approved by the city in October of 2023. After those approvals, the city's land development regulations, section 2872, assisted living facility, was amended to permit assisted living facilities in the urban village UV zoning district. Currently, the approved master plan provides a total of 340 multifamily residential units for Building F and Building G combined. The requested amendment proposes 100 assisted living units in Building F and 240 multifamily residential units in Building G. Development Review Procedures Manual 6, Section 6.3, Amendment to the Master Plan sets forth criteria for minor and substantial modifications. Since the approval of the original master plan in ordinance number 29, 2021, a minor modification was made to reconfigure buildings C, D, and E located on the west half of the property. Whereas the original layout proposed L-shaped buildings, the buildings were reconfigured in a linear fashion, and Building E was relocated above both Building C and D and the courtyard between them. In addition, Building B was reduced in size by 3,632 square feet and no longer projects south towards the existing office building on the adjacent property. I did want to point the commission to a couple of pages in your agenda packet, the first being page 23. On page 23, we have the general information, the staff analysis, which most of that was read. The additional information is the approved building heights. And so you can see the tallest building height in the approved master plan is 90 feet. And then below that, the table at the bottom of page 24 is the proposed amended building heights, the tallest being 75 feet. And a conditional use permit number 1, 2022 was approved with conditions to allow additional building height. According to the approved master plan, the total number of required parking spaces for the site is 1,094 spaces, of which 44 spaces are required to be designed as accessible parking spaces complying with the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA. In addition, a development review committee waiver was approved in 2023 to allow reduced parking space dimensions. The proposed master plan amendment demonstrates a reduced parking demand due to the change of uses and provides a total of 992 parking spaces, of which 41 spaces must be ADA spaces. This reduction in the number of parking spaces may require a waiver from the DRC. The proposed ALF must meet the limitations of the use as described in the Land Development Regulations, Section 28-72. Building floor plans demonstrating compliance with the indoor common area requirements and the minimum required floor area per living unit will be required to be submitted during site plan review. In addition, Section 2872 requires the ALF to provide a minimum of 50 square feet per bed of outdoor recreation area. This outdoor recreation area is an addition to and should not be credited from any required open space for the overall site. No changes are proposed to the conditions of approval that were adopted with the current master plan ordinance. The conditions of approval will carry forward as conditions of approval of the amended master plan. And just to summarize, the reason why this is being presented to you is because the original master plan specified which uses will be in each of the buildings. And since this is going to be changing the uses by adding the ALF use to building F, it requires review by P&Z and council. Last, I just wanted to summarize the findings of staff that's on page 29. The request is to allow a new use assisted living facility, which constitutes a substantial modification to the master plan and requires approval by city council. The request does not propose a change from the current urban village zoning classification. An assisted living facility is a permitted use in the UV zoning district. The request does not increase the number of residential units or square footage of non-residential uses proposed for the site, and staff recommends approval of the substantial modification to the Titusville Resort and Destination Master Plan. Thank you.
Are there any questions of Mr. Galindo? Member Garrod?
I had some email correspondence with Eddie, and I think I want to frame later questions with a question to begin with. The application makes the proposal subject to review. As you introduced it, you had an existing approved development, and that's being deviated from for purposes, which is a good plan, by the way. But it's being deviated, so it's a resubmittal of the whole information packet we got, inclusive of all the development standards within it. That's all subject to our overview tonight for recommendation. Or is it we're only focused on putting in an ACL within the project?
The master plan as a whole is being reviewed tonight, but the only change that's being proposed is the change to the uses.
And the height for buildings.
Correct, the
Reduce it.
reduction in height.
Okay, thank you.
Member Grant.
Why is this called a rezoning?
Good question. So the master plan that was approved previously was tied as a concept to the urban village zoning that was approved previously. So in order to amend that master plan that's tied to the current zoning ordinance on the property, it's a rezoning to change that concept plan.
But we're not rezoning, it's just,
Technically, we're not rezoning by changing the district to a different district. It's a
Right.
rezoning to the same district, but changing the conditions or concept plan that's tied to that ordinance. So it'll get a new ordinance number.
okay. While you're here, page 26. Lines, we say 38 through 42. Is that a new condition that you were speaking of here, in addition to the conditions that you already have?
It's not a new condition in that, that requirement is tied to the ALF use in general throughout the land development regulations. The previous master plan did not propose an ALF, so that limitation or that condition was not included.
I thought the assisted living was already in this plan initially.
It was a different type of care that is more, it's more similar to a multifamily use. And so what they're proposing now is more intensive with the care.
Okay, all right. Thanks for the explanation. Thank you.
Member Moscoso.
Yeah, Eddie, you mentioned that, or the report mentioned that they may require a DRC review for the parking spaces. When you gave that number 992, is that, let me see how to phrase this. So we're going from 340 to 240 multifamily, would that reduce the amount of parking spots needed? I mean, I know the 100 is going over to the ALF, but ALF typically doesn't require as many parking spaces. So would that number go down from 992?
That's correct. So the applicant provided a parking demand study, and they might be able to explain that better, how that analysis was run. But in general, because the number of multifamily units is being reduced, and then the conversion of, not really conversion, but the addition of the ALF, you're right, that the use, an assisted living facility is going to have less of a parking demand than a multifamily use. And so it's kind of algebra, X's and Y's, and figuring all that out. So they might be able to explain it better, but that's why there's less parking proposed in this amended plan.
And they still will need to go before the DRC to get even more reduced parking spots if they want to, or, because it said it may require, for the 992, will that require the DRC review, or?
It's possible. So parking, in our code, we have a minimum and a maximum number of parking spaces. Some developments request additional parking than what the code allows. And I believe the number is 125% above the minimum is what you're allowed to have without any type of waiver process. And so any flexibility, if you're going too low on parking or too high on parking, would require some type of waiver request. The reason why we state that in the report is because a waiver, my understanding is a waiver was previously approved to reduce the number of parking in the original master plan. And so further reducing the number of spaces, even if it's justified because of the change of use that's going to demand less parking, it's still a reduction in the number of parking spaces for the master plan, and so it could require that DRC review.
Thank you, that makes sense.
Sure.
Member Grad.
I was going to ask, in the development report or in the staff analysis, it talks about reduction in spaces, change in use, but it also mentions size, that there was a subject to this being a reduction in parking space size, or did I misread that?
That's correct. There was a previous approval to reduce the number, the dimensions of the parking stalls, the parking spaces.
And the basis for that former approval for parking space size reduction, what was the difference between the standard code size and what the applicant's proposing?
Typically, what we see is a request down to 9 by 18 is the smallest allowed, and that's usually in concert with development providing some type of low-impact development. And so it's what it is a request to provide some site flexibility and reduce the amount of impervious surface that's required to provide the parking in order to either have more building area or more outdoor recreation area. And so it's just a flexibility
And the city standard is 10 by 20? Okay, thank you.
for regular spaces, I should clarify.
Member Childs.
This might sound like a weird question, but for the 50 square feet per bed for outdoor recreation, I know this sounds weird, but would, say if you had a building and you wanted to put that recreational area on top of that building, would that count? Like, is that something possible? Like if you had a turf on top of a building and it was still outdoors, does that count as an outdoor recreation area?
It's an interesting hypothetical. I don't believe the code addresses whether it can be outside on top of the building. So it's not.
Just thought it'd be an interesting way, because it seems like 50 feet's a lot, but obviously they need some place to go outside. I'm just trying to imagine it, but, okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Before we call the applicant to address, I need to disclose something, and I think a couple other people do. I was at the Titusville Mall debate Friday evening, and I talked to Mr. Wright. We did not discuss anything to do with this. We're discussing how hot it was in the mall. That was the limitation of our discussion. Does anyone else want to disclose anything?
Yes, I have had lunch with Mr. Wright to discuss the debate and talk about those things, and I was also at that debate.
I was at the debate. We did not talk really about that, but, yeah.
Okay, the applicants can speak now.
Hi, good evening. I'm Chelsea Anderson. I'm an attorney at Mangrove Title and Legal, 1530 US Highway 1, Rockledge. And I'm here with Jesse Wright on behalf of the property owner, Titusville Mall LLC, and JW Resort LLC. So thank you, Eddie, for the staff report. He covered a lot, so I'll try to address some of the questions that came up. Basically, like Eddie said, we are here requesting a substantial modification to the existing approved master plan for the Titusville Mall property. Currently, the plan has buildings F and G, both as multifamily uses. Building F was specifically a senior, it's independent living. So it's basically an apartment or condo type thing that's limited to seniors, just age restricted. But it doesn't have the type of care and amenities that an assisted living facility would have. And it's also not licensed through the state as an assisted living facility. As Eddie said, buildings F and G currently are approved with just multifamily, 340 units combined. We'd like for building F to be changed to assisted living facility specific use with 100 beds, and then 240 units in building G that will remain normal multifamily type units. So we're not proposing to increase any residential units with this. We're not increasing any non-residential square footage with the request. As the staff report notes, the impacts from the request would be reducing the demand on water, sewer, transportation, because the ALF use puts lower demand on those services than a typical multifamily use would. We are running a site plan modification because the existing site plan is approved without the ALF use. It's approved with a multifamily use. So we have a concurrent site plan modification running at the same time as this application before you today. The staff report notes that there are specific requirements in the code for ALF uses, and one of those requirements is the additional outdoor recreation area provided solely for the ALF use, and it can't double dip with the rest of the site. So this would be in addition to what's required for the overall site development. And we are working with staff and showing in our site plan modification that we will meet that requirement with the outdoor recreation use. We do have proposed, some of that will be, not rooftop, but part of the, elevated, like a floor of the building. And staff has said that that would count as long as it's not enclosed and it is amenitized. You can't just have a patio with nothing in it. There has to be, tables and benches, things like that, to amenitize it as an outdoor area, to count towards that outdoor recreation that we need to provide. On the building heights, so yes, we did not propose a change of the building heights with this. The site plan itself shows, and I know it's not before you today, but we are actually not building the buildings to the maximum height that's allowed in the master plan. Building F, the main roof deck is only 44 feet. And then building G, I think the main roof deck is 62 feet, and then there's some areas I think that it might get into the 70-foot range, but we're not utilizing, there's not 90-foot buildings on the site. And then, okay, the parking. So yes, under the current existing site plan that is approved without the ALF use, we did request a DRC waiver administratively, and we did get that approved to reduce the size of the parking spaces, and then also to reduce the number of the parking spaces. And in exchange for that, we incorporated low-impact development, aspects of the project, and we have an entire recorded covenants against the property that say we have to provide the low-impact development and designating a maintenance entity. All of that has been done. What Eddie pointed out in the staff report is, since we are changing the use to ALF, and we are reducing the number of multifamily units, we actually we're reducing the non-residential square footage, I think, by 3,600 square feet in one of the other buildings. Obviously, we're recalculating what the required parking for all of these use changes are under the code, and then what we're able to provide on the site with the constraints of the site. My traffic engineer is telling me that under code, we only are required to have 951 spaces, and we are providing 945. They are at the reduced size. So we're not sure if the staff is going to require us to get another DRC waiver to reduce the size again, because we did change, we're modifying the site plan. So we're working through that with staff right now. That will all be at the site planning level. If we have to get another waiver, then we will comply with the requirements for that. But this was literally, we were emailing about this with an hour ago before the hearing started. So we're still working through that. But beyond the technical details of the site plan, my client has looked at the area. He's done market analysis. He found that ALF would be an appropriate use for this site. It's something that there's a need for in this city and, frankly, throughout Brevard, so that everybody's not going to Orlando to, find care for their loved ones that need it. If you've driven by the project, you'll see hopefully that there's a lot of movement going on. We are full steam ahead. We are very excited about this. Our team has been working very hard. Staff has been working extremely hard to help us make this a reality. So we're very excited to be here, and we hope that you will support this request to add the ALF use. And thank you for your time. If you have any questions for me, I'll be here. And Jesse would like to say a few things about the ALF use and the project in general as well.
Member Faison.
Yeah.
I'll wait for Jesse to speak.
Okay.
Okay, no problem.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you. You want me to hold something?
We can't see it. We can't see it.
I can just hold it.
Good evening, Jesse Wright, 3461 South Washington Avenue. Have you ever met an attorney that knows so much about the project, ever? She knows a lot, and I appreciate you. So basically, if I can just approach there and I just show you, what we're basically doing is replacing this building, which used to be ILF, same footprint.
Can you stay close to the microphone? Yeah,
Okay.
that's fine.
Okay, so this building was a 6-story building, ILF, all independent senior living. And we're changing it to a 4-story, bringing down, shrinking them by 2 floors, 75 assisted living, and 25 memory care. That's all we're basically doing, which is really a need. We've done a market study and analysis that the city really needs an assisted living more than ILF. That's pretty much. You have any questions on this picture? But everything else basically the same. This building here was 7-story, and now we're cutting it down to 6. Everything else stays the same. Thank you.
Hold that thing up. Just, I'm trying to orientate myself. In that northeast corner, is that where the car wash is now?
Right.
Okay. And,
We just took him out because it was ugly, but other than that,
where's the Chick-fil-A gonna be going?
we figured the residents going to wash their car, go to Tire Kingdom, which is going to be changed to Tire Kingdom. But other than that, we need those out parcels still. But yeah, the hotel is, the pad is already ready, as Chelsea mentioned. We're already moving forward as far as going from shovel-ready to pad-ready. And so everything else basically the same. There's just going to be a lot of ambulances going in and out and people checking in, maybe not checking out. But other than that, everything else is going to be the same. I'm sorry to say that, but that's the fact.
Member Faison.
The ALF, being that you guys are looking at doing an unlicensed ALF. So my question is, what drove the decision, and I can understand the marketing, right? But to move it from multi-residence to an unlicensed ALF? What was that decision like? And what was the advantageous, what are the benefits to having an unlicensed ALF versus just taking the multifamily, leaving it as so, and just conducting ALF business?
Well, it is going to be a license by a state. It's not an unlicensed.
Okay. Okay. I thought I heard her say unlicensed, that's why I asked the question.
So I was pointing out the difference between ILF and ALF because the terminology is somewhat confusing. ILF doesn't need state licensure. It's basically just an apartment or a multifamily building that has a senior restriction on it. ALF does have to be, you can't call something ALF unless it's licensed as ALF by the state, and it's actually a condition of the Land Development Code requirements for ALF use in the zoning district that we have to get it licensed. So it will definitely be licensed.
Member Moscoso.
Yes, I forgot, I also want to disclose that I was at the groundbreaking and got to shovel some dirt. That was really fun.
So let me cover that for a second, because the debate that is going to be a second debate coming up on the 19th was sponsored by a different entity, was sponsored by Titusville Mall LLC, which has nothing to do with this project. So we separated the two completely. There was no discussion about this project in any other part of the debate. I did make a little commercial to talk about the project, but that was it. There was really nothing else more than that.
I have another question. And this might be a sore subject, but could you give us an update on what's happening with Cumberland Farms?
Okay, so maybe you can just. So Cumberland Farm, which is on this in this corner right here, since 2002, it's been basically leaking. And so we have not been able to come to any kind of agreement for them to take out their tanks and replace it. I tried to get the city to go forward and to be part of this possible fight with Cumberland Farm, but under the existing administration, the city backed out, even though we went to the, what is that name again for the environmental TC? No, it was.
Oh, the environmental board,
the-
the
it-
advisory board here.
Yeah, TEC.
Right, right. I went to that meeting and I discussed it. It was a unanimous vote. I'm sorry, it was a unanimous vote so then the city can write a very strong letter to Cumberland Farm to let them know that you need to do something. I mean, something is leaking for over 20 years. And that's a subject that we're going to have to bring up with a new administration because of right now, I don't think the existing administration is going to want to do anything. So we are expecting the city to be involved simply because of the fact that just because FDEP says this is their jurisdiction, and city says, well, we don't want to touch it because that's not our jurisdiction. I think the residents, the citizens need to be protected. We don't know if there's gas coming out of the ground closer to, right now, this portion here is where the jazz and ballet is. They've been there for like 20 years. The kids go there at the ages of about 5 to about 12. So right now it's in a limbo. This does not affect us as far as the phase 1 development, but it is going to affect us when we go to the second phase and we take out the rest of the mall. And I'm hoping that the Water Act, Clean Water Act, is going to be hopefully approved at some point in time. And that causes the city to be involved to basically go and do something when it comes to.
Are you speaking about the Clean Water Initiative
Correct.
that was on the ballot 2 years ago? Okay.
Right, right. So I'm hoping that would make a big change. But as far as your question, it has nothing to do with the phase 1. We have different phase 1 environmental report on the east side that there is no issues with any of that. Otherwise, we would have a problem with the lender.
Member Grant, Secretary Grant.
The Cumberland Farms issue here, correct me if I'm wrong, but are you saying that there is leakage of hazardous material or substance in our water system here and no one is doing anything about it?
That is correct. The contamination is already below the ground. As you know, the water flow goes from west to east, goes right into the lagoon.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't want to mention any name, but there were a representative of the
Go ahead.
city that basically said they don't want to be involved.
You just think, maybe I shouldn't say anymore. Thank you, sir.
Maybe you shouldn't.
Member Garad.
Good evening. I'm going to have a couple of questions for you, if you wouldn't mind. But first, I'd like to ask Chelsea, and time flies as it goes when you get older.
We have 2 Chelseas.
Are you familiar with what used to be the abbreviation or acronym LUST program under the state? Leaky Underground Storage Tank?
No, sir.
The reason I ask the question is that program may have sunsetted. I know I was involved with it at a local government level. The attorney representing you may be familiar with, but at the time, it clearly was an aggressive program to cause property owners to excavate their leaky underground storage tanks when they're determined, and the rest follows suit. I'm surprised that FDEP would not have had some program replacing that for older gas stations. So certainly it's something to explore. I'm going to look into it myself to see what happened to the program. But it was all joking aside. I was a LUST administrator, so it's one of those things I like to say something important to be called.
I'm not familiar with the LUST program. I'm assuming it was sunsetted. FDEP this is under their jurisdiction, the current contamination that's present in the groundwater that is, crossing the boundary into my client's property. I know that they are working towards a no further action on it. They don't have a timeline as of yet, because Cumberland Farms is undertaking it themselves, and so I'm not sure that they have stated a timeline. I have not seen one.
That's sad, because under the program's administration, owners of such facilities were required to monitor it, turn in the monitoring report as soon as you determined the plume was going where it was going. They were given a time clock to remediate the problem, and it was, and local government just had to administer how it programmatically took place. So it'll be interesting for me to find out what happened to that program, if it sunsetted or if something replaced it, but.
Yeah, they are still monitoring it. You know, they have to do their monitoring reports and submit them. I think that the county,
And that may be where the ball lies, with the county, maybe the administrator, as opposed to the city when it's within that jurisdiction. That's something, again, something to look into. But for those, it was a program they actually aggressively, as I described it, made people do this adversarially.
Well, they found out that the tanks were leaking in 1995. And then
I was
they-
administering the program in 19.
And then they changed the tanks in 2002. And it's almost like watching the paint dry in a way, delineation, putting boring underground. They've been doing borings underground for, and I have to give them permission to come on site and do that. It's been like about 30 or 40 of them.
Right.
But it's almost like FDP is giving them a carte blanche because they're Cumberland Farm. That's the way I see it. Maybe there's money under the table. I guess we'll find out.
It's a sad situation. In some cases, they can't even remediate it. They end up having to come in and vacuum, bring it up and reduce the plume by whatever they can, or minimize its continual flow downhill. But those things do exist in the state of Florida, and you apparently are lucky enough to be next to one.
I'm not sure, Member Rod, whether there was one in the state of Florida, but there is a leaking underground storage tank trust fund within the EPA, the United States federal agency.
And I think that spun down into the state, because the state administered the program through DEP at the time, and then the local governments were monitoring it for all the permitting requirements that took place to do it. So that makes sense to me, that it trickled down from federal funding to state to local. But it was a programmatic thing. It was pretty intense. I seem to recall about 10 years. There were even people that was another side of the coin. They made money by excavating the dirt, which was spoiled, and people were taking it and burning off the hydrocarbons and then reutilizing the soil. So there was a spin-off industry taking place, frankly, all over the state, where people that could provide for that service, once you got the dirt out, you had to get rid of it, and you couldn't just go take it in the woods. So I'd be interested for me just to find out what happened to it.
You know, we went through the whole, package with TEC when I presented this, and I mentioned in that meeting is that, all the borings are in this area here. I was basically asking Cumberland Farm, why don't you put some right on Cumberland, on Countrywide, to make sure there is no oil is going underground for these residents here. More importantly, why don't you put some out here on US 1, so then you can measure to see if there's anything going to the lagoon. None of that has been done.
Certainly something the DEP ought to be able to address at some point. And I appreciate the dialogue. Thank you very much. The question I had for you, and I want to bring it to the Commission's attention, I have a picture I can hand to you, since I want to be sure you've got what everybody else has. Yours happens to be in color, just to emphasize my question. And I've had a continual dialogue about a concern that surfaces when you go to multiple family buildings, and the latitude within the city code to frankly interpret what is the building's height. Then that flexibility leads to appurtenance, embellishments, and accessory structure improvements that exceed what one might have thought they were going to see when they saw the rendering. For example, in your renderings and your sketch, and if you look at the applicant's documents here, beginning on page 58, the color rendering photographs illustrate a building which has a flat roof, and that's easy. When you see what I've passed out, you'll notice the shadow, I want to call it a shadow survey. You refer to it as a shadow. It illustrates the cast of shadows so that you know you're not shadowing somebody's property, which isn't preferred if you're the property owner being shadowed. So the illustrations are providing the shadow effect, but what you'll notice in that, what I've passed out, is you'll see the shadow from the elevator shaft tower. And what I'm kind of trying to talk through, and I should have began by saying I support your project. Titusville's lucky they've got such a well-planned project, and your amendment to the ACLF is appreciated, being an older person like myself. The point I make is that herein you see a picture, it's a rendering, you won't have to comply with the rendering, so staff can't hold the picture up on page 58 and demand you make a flat roof. Of course, this is just for a purpose, but the purpose speaks clearly of what happens when you build an elevator shaft with a cable elevator as opposed to hydraulic. And there are several buildings in Titusville that have been a concern of mine simply because everybody knew how high it was going to be, and 25% of the building exceeds that height with embellishments for architectural purposes and/or structural needs, elevator shaft buildings. What I find when I do the math is if you reduce to 74.5 feet, most of those elevator shaft tower cable housings are between 10 and 12 feet high. If you add 12 feet to 74.5, you're pretty close to 90. Now, you began your introduction by saying your buildings are not going to be as tall as what is conceived in your amended development, and that's why I asked the question initially. We're talking about something that is subject to discussion. So when you introduced it as being it won't be as tall as said, I have to ask the question, if the condition of approval was to create the definition within your project's flexible standards, that the maximum building height would be inclusive of those three things, appurtenance, accessory structures, embellishments, you design it accordingly. If your opening comment was it's actually going to be shorter than we're proposing at 74.5 feet, it may be unnecessary to be concerned with. But if you turn that around, as I just mentioned, and take 74.5 feet and add the elevator tower and come back with an architectural rendering for a facade around the front, all of a sudden somebody looks at the picture, sees a flat roof and says, oh, it's only going to be 74 feet tall, but all of a sudden it's not. It's closer to 90 feet. So if you can address that, I'd appreciate it.
Well, all these heights that you are looking at is incorrect.
All these, I'm sorry.
The heights that you're showing here is incorrect. I think Eddie can vouch.
I apologize. All this is to illustrate the shadow of
Right.
what is the
Right.
elevator tower.
We've done a shading study that went through the city, and it was disclosed that the shade did not really bother any other residents, number one. Number two is, as Chelsea mentioned, the 75 feet includes the elevator shaft and everything else. We're going to be staying at below 75, and that includes the elevator shaft and all that. So the residents are going to be up to the 6th floor. The 7th floor would be just the observation deck. It's a 6-story building. We're actually reducing, as we mentioned before, about 60,000 square feet. We're shaving off 1 floor on the top to be able to go below 75 feet, including the elevator shaft and the canopy for the observation deck for the multi-unit. The other two buildings, the hotel is a 5-story, and the building after the assisted living is only 4-story.
And I certainly appreciate that, and the confidence I have in what you say is what we get. I appreciate that as well. The purpose of my point is after the meeting is over, the code is written to be 74.5 feet. If there is no specific specificity as to what is the measurement point of 74.5 feet, the deference to the building code's interpretation will be that of the appurtenants are allowed to exceed the height as long as they don't exceed a percentage of the total building height, which leads me back to this. You see the flat roof in the artist renderings and you see the flat roof in your concepts, but what you end up with is a excessive elevated building for facade purposes, architecture, all that's good, but it's not what people expected to see, and I've found several occasions where that's actually followed the suit led. If tonight what you're saying is nothing's going to exceed, in the short of it, nothing's going to exceed the height limitations stated in your development report, inclusive of elevator towers, accessory structures, and embellishments, I'm good to go. It answers my
You
question.
don't have to take my word for it. I think Eddie can vouch for it. I mean, you have the building heights, and I think, Chelsea, you have that as well, right?
I do. So this is all in the realm of our architects who are not here tonight, and we are going through site planning, so we're not quite at the full architectural rendering stage yet. what the architects have told me is building F, the main roof deck is 44 feet. And there may be some higher roofed elements like stair and elevator areas, as necessary.
But it still is below 74.
Building F is definitely going to be below
So is building
74.
G.
Building G, there is a roofed area that's 73 feet and 2 inches. So I'm not confident that there won't
is.
be anything.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that, I think that speaks directly to my concern. What happens once it leaves a discussion in a public meeting where someone states it's going to be this tall, and then it isn't, because interpretations allow it flexibility. In standard zoning districts where that is the code, and that is how administrators administer implementation of that code, I'm perfectly comfortable with, unless the city chooses to change the way they define buildings to be more specific. However, when you're dealing with an innovative design zoning district, the standard you're making is a zoning district standard. It's not a building code, and I've said this many times to the commission. It is not subject to interpretation. It should be what it is what it is. If you say it's 74.5 feet, don't exceed it. Don't exceed it with any appurtenance, embellishments, accessory structures. But conversely, say it's 74.5 feet and stick a 15-foot elevator tower on top, and you have an excessive height. And what I'm always concerned with from my prior life is now the staff is stuck in a conundrum. Did they mean to say that, or did they say this? And then it's, well, we'll defer to the building code. And that, I don't believe, is the right deference, because this is a zoning district standard, not a building code standard, not an architectural standard. It's just a zoning district, like a 100-foot wide lot.
Your point's well taken, and I understand the
Thank you.
concern.
It sounds like we're good to go. If you're shaking your head, that's not going to be that way.
I want to point out that in this master plan, we haven't created a new definition of building height. The definition of the building height is what is in the existing code.
That's right on the point of making. That's in the existing building code. This is a zoning district code. You're actually to establish it no different than the dimensional standards of your parking spaces or the floor area ratio of your buildings. It's encompassed in your property boundary as a unique and specific code. It's not available to others. So if it was standard zoning, I would be moot. I wouldn't be speaking. But yours is asking the city to embrace your design standards inclusive of that restriction. And so what you see is what you get, and that's why I would prefer that we make sure the definition within your development standards states maximum building heights inclusive of appurtenance, accessory structures, and embellishments. And that's the easiest way to solve the concern I
Right.
have.
You have me on record, but you're going to be below 74.5 or possibly 74.9.
I'm not concerned. I'm more concerned with what it says becomes rather than what we meant to say isn't what became. So I'm comfortable with what you get, and I'll end my question.
We're good.
Okay. Any other questions of the applicant? Thank you. Any cards, Lori?
Yes, James Troutman.
James Troutman, 1907 Barnett Avenue. I did put against that. It's not really against it or for, actually. One is for the Cumberland Farms. I'm surprised that there hasn't been any inspections on these tanks, or that would propose that there would be leaks. Being a retired petroleum inspector, doing non-destructive inspections on above-ground storage tanks and pressure vessels. These are government regulations that have to be inspected on a regular basis. They have to be visually looked at. I know that these are underground, but at some time they do ground penetrating radar, do these type of things to look at these tanks. So I'm surprised to see that we don't have any information on inspections of these tanks to see where this is. That would just be my comment to whoever, if that wants to be looked into. And my only concern would be, let's not turn the parking lot into California. You know, I don't know how big or small like 9 feet is, but I don't plan on, hopefully not to be living there, but I know what it's like to get out, and I've lived in California a couple of times. I know what it's like to try and get out of a small car and back out. So that'd just be my only concern. So that's all.
Thank you. Next card.
That was the last card.
Last card. We'll close the public hearing and I'll bring it back to the commission. Any further questions? Any questions of the staff? Anyone care to make a motion? Member Faison.
I recommend approval of the rezoning 3-24 Titusville Resort and Destination Master Plan Amendment as written.
Yeah, I was second.
Seconded by Secretary Grant. Any further discussion? This is recommending approval of the council. Council will hear this when? Next week?
The 8th and then the 22nd.
22nd, okay.
The final hearing.
All in favor? Roll call, Lori.
Member Garad,
Yes.
Member Childs,
Yes.
Member Moscoso,
Yes.
Secretary Grant,
Yes.
Member Faison,
Yes.
Chairman Richardson.
Yes. Okay, motion passes. Next item is the Building Trades Services Cleanup Ordinance.
Yes, sir. This item begins on page 63. And the next three items, 10B, 10C, and 10D, are all cleanup items. So we're just doing a little bit of housekeeping while the applications are light tonight. The Building Trade Services, item 10B. City adopted a Building Trades and Services Ordinance number 30, 2022 to expand the zoning districts where building trade services use could be established. While drafting a separate PID White Chaffee Ordinance number 29, 2023 to address development along White Drive and Chaffee Drive, staff inadvertently used an incorrect version of the code which had not yet reflected the changes adopted in the Building Trades and Services Ordinance. This draft ordinance proposes corrections which were inadvertently added or removed in order to provide internal consistency and to enhance usability of the code. On page 66, you'll find the change. The stricken through is what's proposed to be removed, and the underline is what's proposed to be added. And what helped us identify that this was an issue within our code is you'll notice at the top of page 66, in the community commercial CC zoning district, the building trade services use is listed as a permitted use with limitations. Again, that's under the CC zoning district. You see the L there. And when you read the limitations, there are no limitations for CC. And so when an applicant was asking for a BTR, their occupational license to operate a business in the city, we realized that we had this conflict in the code. So we're trying to correct that by looking at the past ordinances and what limitations were intended to be there. And that's all I have on this item. Thank you.
Secretary Grant.
Eddie, on page 66, item C4. It says here that there will be limit in community commercial districts. Will be limited to locations with direct access to collector and arterial roads. Does that mean it needs both or just or?
I believe it means or. It should have said or.
Okay.
Good catch.
Otherwise, you have to have it on the corner.
Right.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Any other questions of the staff? Seeing none, I'll open the public hearing. Is there anyone that wants to address this item? Do you have any cards, Lori?
I have no cards.
The public hearing is closed. Any other questions of the staff? We're the city attorney. Let's get her involved in it. Anyone care to make a motion?
So I make a motion, do we approve 10B Building Train Services Clean Up Ordinance?
To
as written?
recommend approval.
To recommend approval.
Any, second to the motion?
I'll second.
Seconded by Member Garand. Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Secretary Grant,
Yes.
Member Faison,
Yes.
Member Childs,
Yes.
Member Garad,
Yes?
Member Moscoso,
Yes.
Chairman Richardson.
Yes. This will be,
This will be heard by
I'm
council
going to
for,
ask you a question.
for public hearing on October 22nd.
Okay, October 22nd. Next item, 10C, outdoor storage cleanup ordinance.
Moving right along. In 2020, the city adopted a cleanup ordinance to correct discrepancies in the zoning code for use table for primary uses. Staff has discovered inconsistencies within the larger use table contained in section 2854 and the individual use standards in section 28151 outdoor storage. In an effort to correct errors within ordinance 25/2020, staff has reviewed the use table and the use standards table for internal consistency and correctness based on staff analysis, previous code versions, and existing code language. This draft ordinance proposes corrections which were inadvertently added or removed in order to provide internal consistency and enhance usability of the code. On this one, on page 76, that's the city's overall use table that has all of our zoning districts and all of the permitted uses in the city, and we've highlighted in yellow the row that's being changed. If I zoom in here, I'll be able to read that. Under M1, our light industrial zoning district, and RMU 500, the code currently has Ls as a permitted use with limitations. And the correction is to remove those. You'll see on page 82 that under RMU 500, at the top of the table, or at the top of the page, bottom of the table, RMU 500, there is no L there, and so it was not intended to be a permitted use with limitations in the RMU. And then under M1, the code currently has an L, it's permitted with limitations, but if you read subsection C, which is where all the limitations of the uses are provided, there are no limitations for M1. And so this appears to have been an oversight when we were doing a large cleanup ordinance, and the outdoor storage was confused with the outdoor storage as an accessory use. We have two different tables. One is for outdoor storage as the primary, the main use that's happening at the site, and then outdoor storage as an accessory that supplements a business that happens to have outdoor storage as part of it. And so some of the L's and P's were mixed between those two tables. And so this is our proposed change to clean this up. Again, the main issue is if we had a business that wanted to establish an outdoor storage use on a piece of property that's zoned M1, they would see that it's permitted with limitations, but then the city has no limitations, and so we became aware of the conflict. Thank you.
Member Moscoso.
I know this is something we're going to discuss in a few minutes, but would this be something that we could look at cleaning up and having it a little bit easier to understand? Because obviously the staff is having issues as well. I mean, it's a lot to take in, and so this could be something maybe we consider. I don't know. I'd love to see examples, or I can look up examples of what other cities do. But are other cities, are theirs as complicated as this, or is there an easier way to maneuver this table?
What I will say is that the people who use the code day in and day out, our staff and engineers and site designers who are looking for this information, they find this format very easy to read.
Okay.
It's very well organized. It's just difficult whenever we need to make amendments to it that we have to include the tables over and over again. So it looks like a lot of information. But in the day-to-day when we're applying the code, it makes it a lot easier this way. I haven't seen very many codes designed this way, though.
Okay.
I agree with you completely. I've been an opponent of this spreadsheet. In fact, we used to have Secretary Grant, I think, was the only member of the commission that was here. We had a former planning commissioner from Minnesota, and she printed out these things, and she put them up in her den, and they wrapped around the room twice. But I've given up on fighting this. Any other questions? I'll open the public hearing. Is anyone to speak?
I have no cards.
Okay. So I've thrown in the towel on this spreadsheet. Anyone care to make a motion?
Yeah. I make the motion that we recommend approval for 10C outdoor storage cleanup ordinance.
Member Childs made the motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Member Grant. You like these kind of spreadsheets, don't you?
I do. I love these. I mean, I'm like looking at this going, this is pretty easy to read because I'm used to like reading JSON data, like data with,
You're
you
a
know.
software person. I'm an HR person.
HR.
Yeah. Member Moscoso? Okay. Any other discussion? Roll call, please.
Member Faison?
Yes.
Member Moscoso?
Yes.
Member Garad?
Yes?
Member Childs?
Yes.
Secretary Grant?
Yes.
Chairman Richardson?
Yes. And that will be heard at the same meeting.
Same meeting.
Next item is 10D, legal ad requirement ordinance.
Yes, sir. Last cleanup item before we get to Titusville plain language. During review of the Code of Ordinances, staff became aware that the requirement to advertise conditional use permits had been inadvertently removed from the Code of Ordinances. Specifically, a portion of Section 34-72, Procedure for Obtaining a Conditional Use Permit, was removed. However, after the removal of this language, the city continued to properly advertise all conditional use permit applications as required by Florida statutes. This ordinance proposes to correct the oversight by restoring the language in Section 34-72, Procedure for Obtaining a Conditional Use Permit. Just reiterating that the city clerk's office confirmed that they had continued to advertise just as state law requires us to. When an ordinance in that section had been approved, it removed that language. There was no impact to the operations of the city. But now that we know that it's missing, we want to add it back in. Thank you.
Any discussion? Any discussion? Any card, Lori?
No cards.
Okay, comes back to the commission. Secretary Grant,
Mr. Chairman, I recommend approval of the ordinance as written.
was there a second?
I'll second.
Okay.
Second by Member Moscoso. Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Member Moscoso?
Yes.
Member Garad?
Yes.
Secretary Grant?
Yes.
Member Childs?
Yes.
Member Faison?
Yes.
Chairman Richardson?
Yes. Okay, we'll go back up to item 9A. This, as you recall, I brought up a discussion item about 2 months ago. I saw on Sunday on CBS that Maryland had adopted a plain language initiative where any of their regular ordinances or anything like that, instructions, they be changed to plain language. And I brought it up for the discussion then, and there's a copy of the order that was signed by the governor about the plain language. Name was Wes Moore. That makes it more readable, some of them, to the general public. And I thought that was a great idea. And I was talking last week to Chelsea, and Mr. Broom came in on this discussion. I understand why there's a lot of the same kind of language, the whereases and things like that. But I'm satisfied with that. But as we saw in looking at some of the ordinances for Melbourne particularly, they was much easier to read. They were kind of in plain language. And, it's like the language in the Bible. There's a difference between King James and the hip hop Bible, if you've ever seen it. And it's still, I would like to ask the staff, Eddie, I understand y'all have to write the ordinances with the help of the attorney's office. Would this be beneficial to the staff to use plain language?
Well, I think that when the staff is trying to draft an ordinance, in our minds, we're writing it in plain language because we want everyone to understand what the rules are, right? That we're all playing from the same playbook. I think the Planning and Zoning Commission offers a good opportunity for people who don't review things day in, day out to give us a temperature for whether what we're proposing makes sense to the general public or if we need to go back to the drawing board. I don't know that an ordinance or a resolution to this effect is necessary because it is something that it's on our radar. But I understand the importance of it, absolutely.
Yeah, anytime you write anything, I'll give you an HR perspective. If you write rules and regulations, you've got to make them plain enough so that anybody from the CEO to the lowest employee understand them. And I think sometimes the staff may get wrapped up in trying to explain things. Well, something else comes to mind, and we've got to add some language that addresses that issue and that issue. I know there's an attempt to put it all in writing, but I kind of think it loses some of the meaning that would be obvious for just the average citizen. Ms. Moscoso.
Yeah, so I was looking this up, and so Maryland, Washington, Minnesota, and California all have initiatives, but there is something that I found, and it's called the Plain Writing Act Overview, and it was signed by President Obama October 13th, 2010. And really, it actually applies for the whole country. So the idea is that we're supposed to be doing this, but I think it is specific to public-facing materials such as brochures, websites, newsletters, and I think we do a good job with that. I kind of agree with Eddie. I think when they write the ordinances, you guys are planners, so you have a whole nother language that you're speaking. But I do think that it is maybe our job when something comes to us that we don't understand, or maybe could be written in a different way, that maybe that's when we propose that as well. Because I do think there is a law. We just maybe I don't want to form a committee, but as things come across, we kind of go through and say, this isn't as clear as we'd like it to be, and kind of point those things out. And then obviously when you guys write ordinances or any material, just keep that in mind, which I know that you do. And so I think it's going to be working together of saying, this might not be as clear as you think it is, or could we add some different language? And I think this is a good conversation to have starting.
Like that 44-page spreadsheet we just saw. That you may love.
Do you want emojis or something? What are we talking here? No, I think it sounds like a smiley face or a sad face, but like you can't do this. But that might be helpful actually. I think we can suggest things as they come through. I think we just have to keep it in mind, and anytime we do ask questions, I think, when we don't understand some of the things, and I think that's kind of a hint to them too. But I definitely understand where you're coming from. I wish that we had like an example in front of us of one that is like confusing. Do you guys have one?
No, but I would say also the longer you're on the board, your language also changes. And so you start using acronyms and things like that. And so we need to be reminded ourselves that we should explain those things. So it's kind of the same thing as just from the board's
The
perspective.
intent of bringing this up was not to clean up our understanding. It's for the people out there to understand what the city means by this ordinance. Because if you were not involved in P&Z and you wanted to add something to your house, and got to look at the ordinances, and you'd have to read it 4 or 5 times. And this initiative would kind of simplify some of the language. And it's fine with me if we don't recommend this to council, but we need to remind the staff they need to make the language as simple as possible. Now I'll defer to Chelsea if she has anything to add to this conversation.
I appreciate everyone's comments, and I do want to just reiterate that I think you guys are the front line for approval of any new ordinance or language that is developing our code. And I look at you guys as a form of a gatekeeper when there is something that doesn't make sense. It is super helpful for it to be called out and rewritten before it gets codified. Once something is in the code, it's really difficult to take it out. And I'll just say that. But another problem that I recognize from looking at minutes and meetings from the past is trying to rewrite an ordinance from the dais or during a meeting, because that oftentimes doesn't allow for adequate review of unintended consequences and may not be the best language possible. And so those are just two things that I think this body can do its best to avoid or have those best practices in mind when you review ordinances. And if there's a significant level of reworking or rewriting language, then tabling is probably a good idea.
And I would add to that, I think when we have those scheduled calls with a staff member, that's when we need to point out, you really don't understand this section of the ordinance or the way this is written. That might be a way you can express that. And it trigger the staff's thinking, well, maybe we need to make that a little simpler. Okay, Secretary Grant.
Yeah, to me, jargon and acronyms is the language of professionals. It's what separates them from the rest of the people, as far as I'm concerned. And I'm curious about, since this has been enacted since 2010, about whether there's any statistics to show how it's been working as far as community enhanced or improved community involvement and stuff like that. This is what this is about, I'm sure, right?
Not really.
And then what is it about then?
It's really to gain an understanding, to put things in plain language.
We understand what's
Yeah,
going
but
on.
it's not
Because-
directed at me, it's directed at the public.
Okay, well,
Make it
I just,
understandable to the public.
I don't know, I just think it's an attempt to continue dumbing down America, but that's just me.
As an HR person, I take offense to that.
I second that.
So
Movement Childs.
would it be, I don't know, so when she said codified, and I was thinking, all right, that might be a word that some people don't understand, truly. And maybe it's a lexicon type thing. Maybe it's a list of words that we have to like, maybe there's a list of words we can think of not using. Instead of using the word codify, we say make law or so, you know. I'm just saying. But then it makes it more wordy though, because like that's a very specific word. It describes, you know, a concept, a complex concept in one word. But if we start using other words, it makes it more wordy though. But I don't know.
Chairman, one other thing I just thought of is that when you all became members of the board and we introduced you to your role, we handed you your public participation guide. That was a document that we prepared to give people the tools, the vocab to understand and participate in this. And so maybe revamping that, updating it, making it more widely available to the general public, not just to the members of the board, might be helpful.
Good idea. Member Garad.
What Member Moscoso was mentioning about the pamphlets and literature that's associated with this, sometimes, at least some communities, they'll provide the layperson's abridged short list explanation of an ordinance together with the official document so that a person that isn't educated to the use of phrases and terminologies can read it in simpler language. You were kind of explaining the difference in Bible writings. I was thinking along the lines too that, when you think about the way ordinances read, if you read them state to state, and now we've got this idea that you just do things different in each state, what you would be thinking of and making it user-friendly for the area you're in, you could have in the south, whereas, comma, y'all, and then you have it, and if you were up north, you'd have whereas you guys. So I think they have to have that.
Use people.
Use people.
Okay. Member Moscoso.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't really want to dumb down our ordinances. I think I like the idea of having any of our like forward-facing or public-facing materials be in a way that everybody can understand, but keeping our code as it is, in my opinion, and then helping as we go along if there's things. And I think a great opportunity is those meetings when we're sitting with you guys and saying, I don't quite understand this, or could we make it easier? It's a good opportunity.
But I'm not opposed to us just talking about this in front of the staff and the attorney. But I think we saw when we compared the ordinances of the Live Local ordinances, our ordinance and Melbourne's and some of the others, it was shocking, the difference. They said the same thing, but it said it in a different way. So I would just say, remember that point. And I wouldn't have to, we could just talk about it occasionally. So this item we don't want to recommend to council, correct?
I don't, no.
I do, but that's okay. Okay. Next item is, you want to
Yeah,
talk?
there were two cards that were just turned in.
Okay.
James Troutman.
All right, so I'm working on this public speaking stuff here. Correction, before, I think I said 1907 was my address, 1705 Barna Avenue. Sorry, like I said, I'm working on this public speaking stuff. I deal with writing techniques and procedures on a daily basis for an aerospace company here in town. And you are correct when you say that a lot of this, this kind of speech is a language for that area.
Would you
a lot
just
of it,
move the microphone? Yeah,
Yep, sorry.
fantastic.
And it is an education thing that I believe an individual needs to take on themselves to educate themselves in this area. I don't expect somebody to come in and be able to do my job. Now, I write techniques and procedures to the lowest employee within our company. So when I write out how to do an inspection, it's very plain. It's hit this button, turn this machine on, do this. Now, are all of my procedures and techniques like that? No. Some of them, I expect the technicians to understand that language if they're certified in that method, so I don't break it down as easy for them, because it's just language that they know. So I do understand the concept for individuals in the public that might not have that education to have that plain language, but to a certain degree, it comes back to you guys, I guess. Y'all are the front lines. If it doesn't read comfortable to you, I would say bring it up, rewrite it, or ask to be rewrote. That'd be my comments.
Thank you. Next card?
Kason Childs.
Kason Childs, 476 Fern. Hi, Dad. I would be for making something that says that we have to write them in plain English. Simply putting, like what you suggested, another paragraph that explains it in plain English. Doing something like that wouldn't really work as intended because the English language is very versatile, but also it can be constraining. For example, just moving a comma in a sentence, saying like, singing to grandma was the most important thing to the family, versus singing to grandma was the most important thing to the family. One is grandma finds it important that everyone needs to sing or she sings, and the other one is the family thinks it's important to sing to grandma. That would be an example of writing out the ordinance in the not plain English, and then someone who may be trying to learn the language and open up a business themselves, or trying to just add something onto their own home, maybe reading it, and then they may misread it, and then they go to the example, and you can try to spell it out in plain English as an example, but that's not the heart of what the ordinance might be. So putting it out in plain English where, like she used the word diocese, not quite sure what the context is, because if I just do a speech to text and say diocese and then look it up, it says like the person who's in charge, the bishop of a Christian something.
I didn't say diocese.
Diocese. So that's what I heard though. So it's a word that, you know, you may read it or say it and it means something completely different. So in plain language, where lexicon would be something where we can just kind of dumb it down, where just anybody can read it, that would be a lot easier. So, yeah. Questions?
Thank you.
All right, thanks.
Any other card?
No more cards.
Okay, we'll close the public hearing. At this point, it dies, as far as I'm concerned. But I did make the point, and we gotta remember this.
I was gonna say, I wish we could do examples, in the code, but there's so many that, like, you would have to have tons of examples, but I do like that idea. That is a common thing to try to explain to people, is using examples, but when some of these codes, it's just like, there's so many different things to it, couldn't possibly do enough examples for it, but it would be great. But.
Okay, the next item is petitions and requests from the public present. Anybody want to speak now? Or forever hold your peace?
Can I make a motion to get rid of the 10 by 10 requirement for an ordinance for building a shed?
No.
Well, can I ask someone else here to make a motion on removing the requirement of a 10 by 10? Like, that's the max that you could have.
I would suggest you talk to the,
That's the Florida Building Code.
yeah.
Florida Building Code. Because in the county, there's no restriction on like you have to get a permit to build. But in the city of Titusville, you have to get a permit to build a 10 by 10 shed.
It used to not be that way.
So, and that's what I would like to do, is to get rid of that, so that way we can just refer to the county for the shed, even though we're in city limits. But because we're in city limits, we have to abide by that ordinance. So if we could get rid of that, that'd be awesome.
Discuss that with your son.
Just for clarification, the city building permits are required for any structure over 120 square feet or 10 by 12 structure. Anything smaller than that is exempt from the requirement. So are you asking to get rid of the exemption?
So what I read was that if I wanted to build a 10 by 10 shed, I'd have to get a permit.
I'm not sure you read that right.
So plain language.
There's the point.
So that's because when I went up, what do I need to do to build a shed in my backyard? It basically says if you want to build anything that's like 10 by 10 or larger, you have to get a permit. But in the county, you don't have to. So, but she's saying that I'll have to.
I would just check with the building department of
Yeah.
your plans and confirm that no permits are required for anything smaller than 120 square feet.
Okay, so that'd be awesome then. All right.
Thank you. Okay, anyone else? Before we go into the reports, I want to remind that I think you only have a day to respond if you're going to that city recognition of boards and commissions. You've got to say you're going by, is it the 4th? Lori, do you know? Okay. You've got only a day or two. You all should have received the invitations. Is anyone going? Okay.
Are you going, Joe?
Yeah, I'll be there.
Mr. Grant, you going?
I'm sorry?
Are you going?
Wait, you crazy?
Okay. You've got to, if you haven't confirmed, you need to do it as soon as possible. And we need to see if any of the alternatives are going to. The staff never sits with us in those things, so they have their own table away from us.
I actually let Lori know I won't be able to attend. I'll be near where all the storm went, recreating on Perry, Florida.
Okay, reports. You want to tell us about Ireland?
It was great. The only report I had for you was the Boards and Commission dinner on October 17th. So if you have an RSVP, I think it's Lisa Marie who's coordinating that. If not, just let us know and we can get you in touch.
Our next meeting, how many items does it look like we'll have on the agenda?
One application. I don't know if we have any additional cleanup ordinance. I don't think we have any other ordinances going forward. So right now it's looking like one application.
Okay, thank you. Anything else? City Attorney.
Thank you for the recognition moment of silence this morning, or the beginning of the meeting. I think that it's very important for all of us to just take some time to, and share what we can with the folks from North Carolina and the West Coast. It's really terrible, but, other than that, no update.
Thank you. I don't have any report. Do any members have a report? Okay, this meeting is adjourned at 7:30.